What is up, ladies and gents? This is George Bean, and I figured with the new Pet Sematary movie coming out in this Friday in April, today is my review for this one movie that, as a little kid, scared me down to my inner core. That movie I'm talking about is the 1989 horror film, Pet Sematary, which was directed by Mary Lambert and written by Stephen King, based on his own novel of the same name. Upon its release on March the 9th of 1989, the film had received a somewhat mixed response from critics, with even the late Gene Siskel giving it 0 stars, and its box office had grossed over $55 million against the $11 million budget. But lately, the film had been receiving more positive reviews over the years since, certainly from the horror fan base. The plot. The story follows Lewis Creed, who moves his family to the small town of Ludlow, Maine, and befriends next-door neighbor Judd, who then reveals to him that they live next to not only a pet cemetery, but also an Indian burial ground. Judd explains that this burial ground can bring dead people back to life, albeit behaving more dead-like. But when his baby son Gage is killed by a passing truck, Lewis decides to bury Gage at the burial ground, albeit unprepared for the consequences that would come. There isn't really much I could say about this film's production due to there not being a lot of info on the internet, but I could mention about the book and other stuff. Like, for the book, Stephen King had admitted that he was hesitant about publishing it based on the advice of his wife, Tabitha, because of its dark themes. But because he needed to give his publisher a book to complete his contract, he ultimately decided to give him Pet Sematary, which would be published in 1983. And when it came to adapting the book into a movie, King would be the one to write the screenplay, albeit with some minor changes of his own, such as removing the Wendigo spirit from the film, which was a major element in the book, and even removing a character who was Judd's wife and a minor subplot involving her, most likely to mainstream the film adaptation and not make the film long in its runtime length. Or one other major difference would be the undead's behavior. In the book, they are more dead-like, similar to zombie, mostly just limps around and does zombie-like things. But in this movie, they were made to be much more aggressive, even resort to killing others. I believe this may have been done likely to have an actual threat in the film by the third act. And of course it would be no surprise, but this film was shot primarily in King's home state of Maine, as stipulated in his contract for this film. King is known for setting all of his books in Maine because he lives there, so I guess it'd be easy for him to leave home and just go around the corner to the set. The music was composed by Elliot Goldenthal. His other credits include Alien 3, Batman Forever, and Heat. His score in this film is very creepy and goosebumpsy, to say the least, and it makes the film feel somewhat dreamlike, especially during the more creepy moments. The score, along with the unearthly sound designs, helps provide the film with an atmospheric feeling and sense of dread to it. Of course, because this film was moderately successful, Paramount had opted to develop a sequel, with Mary Lambert returning to direct. The sequel, titled Pet Sematary 2, was released in 1992 and starred Edward Furlong in the lead role. This was a year after his breakout role in Terminator 2, and it also featured Clancy Brown as well. However, the sequel was not successful and had received negative reviews, with many pointing out how it shifts tone into dark horror comedy. At some point in the late 2000s, Paramount began development on a Pet Sematary remake, with several directors coming and going, but after the massive success of the new It film in 2017, I had predicted that a second wave of Stephen King movies would come soon afterwards. And of course among them was a new Pet Sematary film, which is now starring Jason Clarke and John Lithgow, and is slated for release this Friday on on April 5th. And based on my latest news from it, it appears that the new film is getting very positive reviews and is now even being called one of the best adaptations in recent years by King. I remember first watching this movie on a videotape, which my pops recorded it on back when I was like 5 or 6 years old. And after a few viewings, it then truly scared the holy hell out of me. I mean, it scared the shit out of me as a little kid. I mean, I didn't even want to look at the videotape it was recorded on. It just said Pet Sematary on it. It was one of those movies that really gotten down into my skin, along with Candyman. This movie, along with Candyman, were the only two movies that truly scared me down to my inner core. I think this may have been the movie that actually made me sleep with a nightlight on when I was a young kid. Of course, I'd grown up and I could easily sleep in the pitch black dark, but back then it was really scary as a kid. I can understand why people wouldn't want their kids to watch scary movies like this. My pops wasn't exactly a good role model for parenting since he was the one who had shown me this movie, and he had even apologized for that. But I am glad to have grown up on it, and I will say that director Mary Lambert actually does a pretty damn good job in maintaining an overwhelming sense of dread and atmosphere in the film, and also exploring the tragic horror of reality, exploring the inevitability of death. This is the type of horror movie that you must be in a certain mood to sit through it. But still, it does shock me to know that Mary Lambert was also the same director of the Disney Channel film Halloween Town 2, believe it or not. This movie was nightmare-inducing to watch. There are big moments in the film that would get to me as a kid, especially the Zelda scenes. Or maybe even the scene where Judd explains to Lewis the story of Timmy Baderman, a World War II soldier who died while on his way back home, and was brought back to life by a screaming father, thus proving that somebody had been buried up there before, though it had ended in a bloody consequence when Judd reveals that he and his friends had burned down the Baderman house with Timmy and his father still inside. But interestingly, Rachel's sister Zelda was actually played by a man because they were unable to find a female actress who could be that skinny and bony like that. So they opted to find a guy who looked like that. You probably wouldn't even tell it was a man unless you looked it up. But the scenes when Rachel ends up encountering Zelda in a dream-like state, it was really freaky for me to watch those scenes. Like the bit when Zelda jerks up from the bed, you can hear the bones crack in her body. It was really freaky to watch. I was even afraid of hearing Zelda's voice there, the way it sounds, that echoiness. There's also the one scene in the first act that had really used to freak me out as a kid. That being when Lewis meets the ghost of Victor Pascal, who had just died on him, and Pascal, as a ghost, asks that Lewis follows him outside, and there, Pascal leads Lewis to the Pet Sematary, claiming it's a place where the dead speak, and warns him not to go beyond the pile of broken trees, beyond the Pet Sematary, where a blue light ends up glowing from it, obviously referring to the burial ground located beyond. But Lewis believes that he's just simply dreaming. Or is he? That scene really used to freak me out as a kid, mainly because of the unearthly sounds that are made in that scene. And also, I do like how the actual Pet Cemetery actually looks in the film. It definitely looks like a cemetery for pet animals with the grave marks and all. And I do also like how the word cemetery is misspelled. Obviously, the kids who wrote that sign did not watch The Electric Company to learn the difference between a hard C and soft C. With that said, however, the one thing that makes this film hard for me to watch it is its overwhelmingly dark tone. Its themes about loss, death and the inevitability of it. When it explores those, it does sort of make the film feel a bit depressing to watch, especially in the scene where Gage is run over by a truck in the road. It does feel hard for anybody who might have had a similar experience like that. It is kind of hard for me to watch a horror movie like that. The irony, I am happily okay with watching teenagers and adults being killed off in a horror movie, but not they can kill as many men as they like. But women, children, or dogs, those motherfuckers. But one other thing that puts me off is how they live on this road where huge trucks are speeding by down the road, and yet they think it's okay to just let their kids waltz around freely on the yard. Honestly, I'd put up a fence around that yard just to keep the kids inside. I know my parents did that when we had moved into our new home 20 years ago when we were little kids. They had put a fence around the yard. But as for the cast, Dale Midcoff was at least pretty good as Lewis Creed. It's not the best performance, but he does do his best with the script he's given. But yeah, there are a few moments in this film where his acting is a bit off, but that doesn't mean that he was really bad in this. He was okay. I think if he was given more for his role, he could have been better in it. But many people, but that's okay at least. And Fred Gwynne was absolutely stellar as Judd Crandall, a complete contrast to his role as Fred Munster in that old TV show, The Munsters, which my pops had always used to watch. Fred Gwynne's acting here keeps you engaged throughout the film, especially when he goes into discussing about the burial ground to Lewis, such as the power it holds and his past history with it. He even buried his own pet dog up there at one point, and how he had noticed a change in his dog's behavior when he came back. I am always engaged by whatever he says about the burial ground. When I hear him saying not to bury anybody up there, I believe him. But in another way, it's also kind of like, why did Judd have to show Lewis the Micmac burial ground? He knew what could possibly happen. So really, if Judd hadn't shown Lewis the burial ground, none of this would have happened as it did in the film. But still, Fred Gwynne was outstanding as Judd. It could possibly be one of his very best film roles out there, alongside his role as the judge in My Cousin Vinny. And Denise Crosby was also good in her own right as Rachel Creed. Her best moments are maybe when the character is talking about with Lewis, especially when it involves her dead sister Zelda. I'm not exactly a big Star Trek fan, mainly I hadn't watched everything Trek, but I had read that she was more known for appearing in the Star Trek The Next Generation, but I also mainly remember her from appearing in that 1998 film Deep Impact, which was also pretty good too. The character Gage Creed was played by Miko Hughes, who actually does a surprisingly good performance in this, even at the age of 2. He would also go on to be in other films such as Kindergarten Cop, Wes Craven's New Nightmare, and even Mercury Rising. As a kid, I had recognized Miko in both this and New Nightmare. He was pretty good in that too, but he was surprisingly really great in this here. Amazing to think that he was still in toddler age, and yet could manage to give a great acting performance, especially in the last third when he comes back alive. One thing to mention, the Creed's pet cat, Church, who you will always see on the posters and DVD covers. When it comes back alive, Church does become frightening in the film, especially when his eyes are glowing. It gives off a sense of freakiness to the cat. I also love how he's named Church, short for Winston Churchill, but thought that was a nice little touch there. But also one other thing, is that I do love the song at the end credits, that being the song Pet Sematary by the Ramones. It's a great song to listen to, especially if you're a Ramones fan. It perfectly encapsulates the film's premise in the lyrics. And also, they did the song because Stephen King was a fan of theirs, and it just so happened that the director was associated with them. But it is a really good song to listen to. I'll happily listen to any and all music from the 1980s. So overall, I'm willing to I'd give Pet Sematary a rating of 6.5 stars out of 10. Because while it does have a few particular flaws within it, it is certainly a pretty decent Stephen King adaptation in its own right. And it holds a good place in my heart for managing to frighten me badly as a kid. And I'd also recommend watching it before you take the chance to go see the new film, mostly to see how different they both are to each other and what has been changed from the book. So thank you for watching, ladies and gents, and I will see you all next time, and remember, sometimes dead is better. Peace.